Ladies and gentlemen, wow, another reason for me to be nervous. California State Senator Fran Pavley has focused on climate solutions throughout her career as a legislator. In 2002, she authored a bill limiting greenhouse gas emissions from new cars and light trucks, creating a model for national standards that were adopted 8 years later. In 2006, she authored the Global Warming Solutions Act, a comprehensive framework for cutting emissions across many sectors. A native of Los Angeles, Senator Pavley spent 28 years as a public school teacher. Wow, a public school teacher. In 1982, she became the first mayor of the city of Agoura Hills. She served 4 terms on the city council. She was elected to the Assembly in 2000 and to the Senate in 2008. Ladies and gentlemen, State Senator Fran Pavley.
Maybe as a former 8th grade classroom teacher whose students monitor the clock every second, I'll try to be timeful. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be back in Santa Monica. You know, the redistricting threw me a curve. Ended up losing wonderful Santa Monica and the west side, and not that I don't love my new district. There is a slight change between Santa Monica and Simi Valley and Santa Clarita. Just saying. But many of these same issues are relevant there. I want to thank Church of Ocean Park for their good work. It reminds me of the good work that the Interfaith Power and Light did in relation to California's tailpipe emission bill, the bill I authored back in 2002. There's nothing like a group of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian clerics lobbying in the halls of the Capitol to really bring home the message. Their message was the moral responsibility we have for caring for the planet and future generations. And here's a hidden secret. That car bill that passed, which was a collective effort, and I appreciate that, passed by the narrowest of margins, 41 votes, and you need 80 in the Assembly. The key swing vote, I won't mention names, but his priest made a home visit 2 days before the vote, talking about how important this decision was. I hadn't realized his priest made a visit, but it was several weeks after the vote, and he said to me, how did you arrange that? You know, I had nothing to do with that. That was the power of the Interfaith Power and Light, and you can't get a better lobbying group in the halls of the Capitol and making those individual connections. So that might be a model for the future as we sort of re-energize our efforts moving forward. Let me also just thank Judy Abdo and the 3 members of the Santa Monica City Council. I always still brag about Santa Monica. There's always some competition between some city named Berkeley or one of those others in the state, but very progressive politics, especially regarding environmental sustainability, usually, you know, way out in front of the curve, but we need those models, so keep up the good work here in Santa Monica. And even though I'm just a little further north and west, I still feel like I represent this area, so thank you again. Let's go on to the first slide. I decided not to hold the clicker, so here we go. I had my staff put together a few slides just to keep me on track, because I tend to tell stories and I fill up 50 minutes at a time, because that's what I did for 28 years teaching 8th grade. But I always try to talk to people in California about the cost of doing nothing. I mean, we get so programmed in thinking about, oh, we can't do this, it'll create higher energy costs for our utility bills or our gasoline. But what is the cost of doing nothing in California? And then I start talking about the impacts directly to California. Yes, there are global impacts, but if you can make it relevant to people that you have to communicate with, it's critically important. So, of course, sea level rise. What is the cost to 1,100 miles of coastline on infrastructure or on Cost of the tourist economy, how will it affect our insurance rates, that's a cost. I chair the Water Committee for the state of California. What are the true costs of earlier melt of the Sierra snowpack, less snow in the future, the importing of long distance of water, how can we become more regionally self-sustainable? What are the costs on sea level rise of saltwater intrusion into the delta in Northern California? How does that affect your water supply? How does that in the long term affect the cost not only to ratepayers, but our agricultural economy in the Central Valley? Also linking the costs of climate change, and Bill's a scientist, I just try to, I think my role in life is try to explain things to a broader public up in Sacramento, and that's a challenge, you know, especially with term limits, 119 other people to talk to all the time. But what are the links between climate change and warmer temperatures and health impacts? Do you know places like Fresno, 1 out of every 5 children carry an inhaler because they're asthmatic. They've had real problems of higher evening temperatures, problems with health impacts, especially to the elderly. It's going to get worse in what we call our urban heat islands as well as the Central Valley. There's a lot of relation to climate change, health impacts, and we need to talk about that collectively because I can talk about greenhouse gas emissions, but I find it when I talk in a broader context, not to you people, in a broader context, really bringing home what it means personally to our state and your community is incredibly important. So this slide was just sharing with you some of those costs. Let's move on to the next slide. I thought I'd start off this presentation with some good news because sometimes I'm sure all of you like me get very frustrated with the federal government level and perhaps some of the things we do on the state level. I recognize that. But what are some of the good news things? Well, in California, most of our greenhouse gas emissions come from mobile sources, right? The transportation sector. We're sort of unique. Other states, it could be more stationary sources. California's mobile sources. So we're zeroed in on focusing on that as our #1 objective. So what's been happening lately? Well, the National Fuel Economy Standards, the one that President Obama passed courtesy of a Supreme Court decision that allowed the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. They now, nationally, cars will eventually get an average of 45 miles per hour fuel efficiency standard, and it was based on California's tailpipe emission bill. We can't regulate fuel efficiency, but we can regulate, courtesy of that Supreme Court decision, greenhouse gas emissions from the tailpipes of automobiles. Give yourself a round of applause, because many of you in this room worked on that. Paul, Scott, right, and others. Now, just this month, the second 2 bullets up there, in Sacramento, Mary Nichols with the Air Resources Board announced that California is working with 7 other states to really incentivize and roll out 3.3 million alternative fuel vehicles that lie on battery power. So we're talking about plug-in cars, plug-in hybrids, as well as all electric cars. The coalition will be with Oregon and Washington, plus a handful of states, 5 states in the Northeast. That is 45% of all cars sold in the country. And one thing they're going to do and work on together is really providing links into infrastructure, whether it's the charging stations and other things. But the governors are all on board, and I think tomorrow you'll hear Governor Brown talk about additional things a group of states are working on together. Because just like climate change, when we can get to the tipping point of over half the states, or at least percentage-wise, 50% plus 1 of the states wanting fuel-efficient vehicles or energy efficiency, we can start creating those dynamics, not only in the marketplace, but politically pressure on Washington. So we're going back to that formula. The third bullet down, this is a bill the governor just signed. It was AB 8, and I carried the companion measure SB 11. It'll put up to $2 billion over the next 10 years in incentives, not only to the Carl Moyer program, you might not know what that is, but it's money going to, frankly, clean up the air. It's spent wisely, usually by our local air resources boards. It's had a tremendous impact, whether it's in the Central Valley of reducing diesel tractor emissions and truck emissions from the ports, but it also has a lot of money for those incentives and rebates to encourage people to purchase alternative fuel vehicles. That is one of the selling points out there. This continuing package will roll out over the next 10 years. And the reason why this is exciting, the automobile manufacturers see the commitment California's making, and they're matching that commitment. 12 years ago, they were suing us. Today, they love us, and even Ford and GM officials, president of GM, has told me, we can't keep up with demand. That's a good thing, right? So whatever your issues are, we have to figure out how to channel the marketplace to get that consumer demand or reach different messengers on this. So those are the good news. Down here is good news too. 33% of all the energy in California is going to come from clean, renewable sources, alternative wind, solar, geothermal, and on. That is now a floor, not a ceiling. We are committed to raising that to 40 to 50% over the next several years. And here's the amazing thing about this. A year ago when this bill was on the floor of the state Senate, how times have changed. We had probably a half a dozen Republicans supporting that bill. They get it. They supported the AB8 funding bill, continuing existing fees on cars, voting for it. Why? They see the benefits, and the people in the Capitol that are advocating for these bills are like, oh, all the manufacturers, the major automobile companies, the car dealers. I mean, it's a broader coalition these days. And all these legislators regarding the solar and wind, they're mostly in rural Republican areas. They're creating jobs right there. They're strong advocates for these programs. That needs to catch on around the country. The next bullet, some of you had involvement with, Prop 39, which passed last year on the ballot, provides $2 billion to schools and community colleges. You get some bill at Santa Monica Community College, about $550 million a year for the next 5 years will go to schools, K-12, as well as community colleges, mostly to reduce energy consumption. Modernizing heating and air conditioning or lighting are the primary uses, but there's other things as well. If schools have already invested in all that, because probably Santa Monica schools have, you can go on and use it for solar and everything. That money's rolling out the door this year and next year for the next 4 years. Every dime you save in schools on energy bills, you can use it for the classroom, right? That's the real benefit. And then lastly, down here, TV efficiency standards. Our Energy Commission, who does an amazing job, is rolling out really, it'll be the most stringent and energy efficient TV standards for those new, bigger televisions that are so popular these days. Let's go on to the next one. More good news. We're finding out that in California, and you've seen the models, our energy consumption, despite our increase of population, has stayed flat. It's the lowest per capita in the nation. We enjoy competing with Texas, do we not, on so many levels? They're paying more than 2 times as much as we are per kilowatt hour for on their energy bills that we are, because we're smarter. We know how to save energy and not waste energy. We have found out it is less expensive to invest in energy efficiency than to build a new power plant. We reverse the incentives, so even the utility companies get it. Let's go on. California is attracting lion's share of clean tech dollars. We get about 50 to 60% of all the clean tech investment capital in the United States comes to California. Why? We put a cap on emissions and created a marketplace for alternative fuels and renewable energy. We're seeing the benefits in LA, which is becoming really quite a clean tech corridor and R&D place. I'm seeing it in my brand new district in Chatsworth. They've got Capstone Turbine, who's selling energy efficient turbines to countries all over the world. Solar City is out there. Boulder Electric is producing vehicles. They've actually moved from Boulder, Colorado, because they like our policies better in California, yes. And over 310,000 new clean energy jobs to boot. What about the military? Here's a surprising story. You find your political partners in interesting areas, interfaith council and life. How about the military? Do you know they have met and exceeded all of AB 32's standards? Of course, they have an advantage. They can just order it done, and it's done. They don't have the pesky political system to deal with. But if I go out to the Navy bases in Ventura County, which is part of my district, they have LEED silver or platinum buildings now out there. They're using biofuels made there on site with partnerships from the private sector. They reuse, they're almost fully sustainable. They reuse all their food waste and other kinds of waste. They get it. Several reasons. They tell me directly. These are the top military officials and supported by the Department of Defense. They say too many people are dying along the supply lines in Afghanistan. That's a waste of human life, and they go over the statistics, and they consider climate change one of their greatest military threats in the long term. Drought-plagued nations with massive population shifts into unstable areas of the world, they understand that, and so they are committed to not only California standards, which are a good first step, but even greater level. Now, they don't talk about it too much on the federal level because they also have a benefit of all the energy they're saving, even with sequestration. They can still maintain their operating costs at their military bases by being smarter on the way they use energy. So I've actually been spending time with the military on climate change issues, and I wanted to share that with you. Okay, next. Local governments, I mentioned Santa Monica. I'm not going to go through all these, but these are just a sample of some of the things local governments are doing. And kudos to the city of Los Angeles, starting January 1st, banning plastic bags. Yay. That's a small thing, but a meaningful thing, and you should tell people the connection to being plastics and oil consumption, let alone the litter and everything. But all these things are things that your communities are doing with their farmers markets and putting it into the schools as far as better lunch standards. Building standards, we still have a challenge, frankly, on making sure multi-dwelling units benefit from energy efficiency. I know it's something Santa Monica cares about. It's difficult when you don't own the building to invest in all that. And also using net metering and feed-in tariffs in order to create the right incentives for energy efficiency. So let's move on. A brief overview of what is AB 32. It's amazing in Sacramento. I told you the Clean Car Law passed in 2002. There's 4 of us left in the legislature that were around when that passed. We have term limits. So we have constant sort of rediscussions and education on all these issues, and then we went through a recession. AB 32 passed in 2006. I think there's 5 people left in the assembly that were around in 2006 because they stayed there for 6 years and are out, so that, again, the turnover. So what is AB 32? It's a multi-sector approach using mobile and stationary source strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions back to 1990 levels by 2020. It's being implemented primarily by the Air Resources Board, but working collaboratively with the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission and local governments. Where do our greenhouse gas emissions come from? And this is just a brief overview of it. See the transportation sector? That's why we're so focused on that. It's so critical. Industrial, yes, like refineries and paper processing and food waste plants and other things. Building and energy use is the next biggest contributor, and other things. But let's look at what we call the scoping plan over here. This is 2008, and it's been updated and continues to be updated. So how do we match that where the greenhouse gases come from to what we need to do. Well, over on the far side, the clean car standards that we passed in 2002, that are national standards, that's a big hunk. But also next to it, what else in the transportation sector? We have LCFS. Do you see that? If there's one thing I'd like to share with you today that I need your help in, that's the low carbon fuel standard. Fancy acronym. What is it? It's a requirement that all oil refineries reduce the carbon intensity of their fuels by 10% minimally, using a full life cycle analysis. So you get penalized from importing it in and things like that. The oil companies, I believe, next year politically are going to do everything in their power to prevent that from going into effect. And if that doesn't happen, we lose a huge part of the reductions envisioned in AB 32. They are investing, as you know, heavily in oil recovery. They're not investing enough in biofuels and alternative fuels. We've got to keep that signal to the marketplace because we are seeing the investment in cleaner alternative fuels to use in our transportation vehicles, not just keeping up the same approach we are. So we know they can do it. They are going to put every pressure they can to change that or delay it next year, so stay tuned, that's critical. Smart growth strategies, Santa Monica's a model, obviously, in smart growth strategy with their mixed use and use of transportation dollars effectively. Energy efficiency, that's appliances, refrigerators, buildings, etc. Renewable energy is 19% of reductions. We're on track and exceeding our expectations when AB 32 passed, so that's good news. Cap and trade, that's a small segment of it. What is that? Yes, there's still a cap on emissions, right? AB 32 put a cap and rolls back to 1990 levels. And if any businesses exceed what the required reductions are, because we want to incentivize that, they can sell those to someone else who is not able to meet their reduction requirements. Overall, it's still, you meet the reductions envisioned in AB 32, but it allows sort of the marketplace to take off. It's somewhat complicated. It can work, requires to make sure that emissions reductions are enforceable and permanent and can be verified, and our Air Resources Board is committed to getting that right. And that last two pieces of the puzzle up there are looking at short-term but very important greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and that's relating to black carbon and methane and some of those that are critically important. Okay, let's go on to the next one. I mentioned the oil company tax. They want to not have to purchase allowances under AB 32. We're auctioning off allowances, so the major emitters will have to, essentially it's a form of a carbon tax, but it requires them to purchase allowances over what they emit, so they're incentivized to reduce their emissions. They would like to get rid of that. There's lawsuits that we've defended several times over that say that, AB 32 and auctions are really not a fee, they're a tax. And what does that mean? You would need a 2/3 vote of the legislature. I don't think we have a 2/3 vote of the legislature. So we're very cognizant of that any expenditure of revenues from AB 32 has to be spent for its intended purpose of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That means cleaner cars, more fuel-efficient cars, energy efficient buildings, etc. Let's go on to the next. So a few things you can do, but with this group, you're self-starters and you can think of a lot of things yourself. Obviously, keep Sacramento, hold our feet to the fire, and we work with other states. I'll tell you, I spend a lot of time working with other states because it's all about how we affect the national government. Connect to your community. I haven't checked out this website, but please do so. One of my staff members thought it would be excellent. And the third bullet that's not filled in is one I just call personal responsibility. I think it's all important, very important for all of us to be models in our personal behavior of working together to be more self-sustainable. And with that, I will stop what I am talking about. I want to thank you very much for allowing me a chance to give you a statewide perspective and overview.